Hello, this is Indie Hype for Task Force Geek, and my name is Dirk Hooper. My guest today published his first formal comic script with Nexus, the science fiction title he co-created with illustrator Steve Rude in 1981. The series garnered numerous honors, including Eisner Awards for both creators. A prolific creator, he is responsible for The Badger, Ginger Fox, Spyke, Feud, and many other comic book titles. He and artist Jackson Guice relaunched The Flash in June 1987. He and Klaus Janson, one of my favorite artists, introduced the character Microchip as an ally of the Punisher in The Punisher #4. In 1988, he wrote the Deadman feature in Action Comics Weekly, which led to two subsequent Deadman limited series. He has also written for numerous other mainstream characters, including Batman and several Star Wars adaptations for Dark Horse Comics. More recently, he's published the Biker and Florida Man series of novels, and he's here today to talk about his new Indiegogo project, Thin Blue Line. Mike Barron, welcome to Task Force Geek.
Thank you, Dirk.
To start off with, I want to ask about your video, Mike Barron, on how to write comic books. You say that comics is a forgiving medium. Please explain what you mean by that.
I mean that there are you can get away with things in comics that you couldn't in any other medium. Nobody would take them seriously. And I hate to say it, but people will buy comics that are poorly written and poorly drawn just because they're a comic book. Now, the comics I'm about to mention are not poorly written or poorly drawn, but it's a concept that could only make its way into the national zeitgeist via comic books. And a couple of examples are Mutant Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Flaming Carrot, and Superman himself, who appeared in 1939. And it wasn't until decades later when Superman hit the small screen with George Reeves. But even then, we may call it camp, which is a condescending term you apply to art that lacks sincerity, that's not to be taken seriously. And the example is, of course, nobody believed that Superman was actually flying in that TV show because George Reeves was held up by wires facing into a fan to make his right. And we all knew it. We all knew it, but we bought it anyway because we loved the character and the stories were entertaining. And it wasn't until you got to the Christopher Reeve era that special effects had grown to such a point that you could actually watch the screen and say, yeah, he is kind of flying there. Yeah, I will buy that. And of course, since then, CGI has grown tremendously so that you can show virtually anything in a movie if you're willing to put the work into it. But comics are the most forgiving
and the money.
medium. Yeah, there are. And comics are also the only multimedia art form that one person can produce in his own room. You can write it, pencil it, ink it, letter it, color it, and publish it yourself. I suppose you could do a film too, but that would be a challenge to tell a compelling story in a movie if you only have one actor.
That's so true.
It can be done, but with comics, your limitation on the budget and on special effects are simply how good an artist you can get. Because a great artist will draw and illustrate anything you want, and when it's done well, the barrier between the comic and the reader disappears, and the reader plunges entirely into the story. And by that I mean he's no longer aware that he's experiencing artifice, that he's looking at pictures on paper and turning the pages. He's living that adventure. He's inside and he cares about the characters. But that, of course, depends on good writing. And as Theodore Sturgeon pointed out, Sturgeon's Law, 90% of everything is crap. That certainly applies to the arts, all the arts.
For sure.
And it especially applies to comic books because we're not accustomed to taking comic books seriously, except for a minority of creators. Then you get a lot of silly comics. I mean, just look back over the years, all the collections you've got, the Mort Weisinger era at DC, and Herbie, the Fat Terror, and Archie comics. They're fun, they're entertaining, they have the personality, but nobody takes them seriously
Sure.
until you get to the modern era of Marvel. And Stan Lee ushered in a new era by making his characters much more realistic with personal problems. But I have to say that before then, Will Eisner was working towards that same goal. And of course, Will Eisner is the father of the graphic novel. He was the first one to do an extended story in graphic novel form. And his writing got better as he got along. It was always good, but towards the end, I think he did something called A Conversation with God, and it was profound. And it just goes to show that comics are what you make of them. They can be a silly trifle that you forget the instant you set it down, or it can be a memorable story that sticks with you for years, like Watchmen.
Absolutely. Or Nexus.
Or Nexus.
What is your writing process for comics?
Well, when I started writing, Dirk, I would just sit down and draw each page out by hand. I draw a big rectangle on the page.
Oh, yeah.
And I draw the first panel. And, I'm crude. I'm a crude artist, but I'm good enough to get my ideas across. This is a couple of people approaching a house in the hills.
Right.
And I just do it I did this on the fly for a demonstration. And when I was writing these comics by hand, I would labor over them quite a bit. And my art is crude. It's not professional, but it's good enough that I can draw whatever it is I'm trying to envision, the monster, the spaceship, the city. I have a crude understanding of perspective and human anatomy. I read about human anatomy, and I do for years. Hi, Pops.
Hey, Pops.
You're dogging me, Pops.
I was just on his show last weekend or the weekend before. Yeah, there you go. Hey, Pops.
But that's how I wrote comic books for 15 or 20 years, and editors and artists loved it because my art's good enough that you could tell at a glance what I was indicating. And I also would include everything in the script and all the directions and the captions. Now, occasionally when I got the pages back, I might alter the script a little, but not much. But the writing comics that way taught me a lot of important things, not the least of which is how much weight a page can bear. And by that, I mean, how many panels, what pictures, how much dialogue, how much captions. And it taught me to be terse, to be spare, to pare those words down to a minimum, particularly dialogue, and use them not only to advance the story, but to characterize your characters. I never was much for giving speeches in comics. I don't think I've ever had a comic character deliver a speech.
Right.
But when I flip through recent comics, they're filled with speeches and lectures. And
oh, God.
I don't understand. Yes. And the reason they are is because the people that created or wrote those comics forgot the number one rule, which is it's the writer's job to entertain.
Of course.
And that's why people buy the comic. They want to be entertained. They want a great story. They want a character that they can root for. They want to be involved. They want that story to be so good that they forget about everything else that they're doing. And if somebody comes in and interrupts them, they get irritated and say, man, you broke the spell. Because a good comic should be able to weave a spell that totally absorbs the reader. And that's what I try to do. I always say a comic is a dynamic narrative, just like any work of fiction, with a beginning, a middle, and an end, but it also has a pulse and a rhythm. And by that I mean you don't have 6 symmetrical panels on each page or 8 symmetrical panels. Now, Marvel did this successfully for many years, and it certainly works, and there's nothing wrong with it. But in the modern era,
right.
We've learned that a page can expand or it can contract depending on the needs of the story. And there are times when you want to use a big image to reveal the werewolf. I always think of that werewolf in Swamp Thing, Bernie Wrightson.
Yeah.
And it was a great werewolf. But you come to that page and you're looking at the werewolf and you think, wow, great werewolf. But it doesn't really advance the story. It's just an image. And that's why I always try to have at least 2 panels on every page. And I'll take 2/3 of the page or 4/5 of the page for the big expose, whatever it is, the monster, the city, the spaceship. But then that bottom panel says, and the story continues. And then you want to turn the page. Because
Yeah.
the essential question in all fiction is what happens next? And the reader has to care about the story and the characters before he'll turn that page. Well, how do you make the reader care? You use every trick at your disposal. Here's just 3 examples. Just one, you create a fascinating character. And of course, whenever I say that, I think of Sherlock Holmes, who is more popular now
Yeah.
than he ever has been. He's a
Absolutely.
fascinating personality. And for those who have not seen the Cumberbatch Sherlock Holmes, I think they stand up there with the very best of the films.
Those are excellent.
Yeah, they're just brilliantly written and performed. But most people are unaware that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has written 3 Sherlock Holmes novels.
I didn't know that.
Okay, most people don't. The second thing you have is a compelling situation. And I always think of Jurassic Park. What if you could clone live dinosaurs from ancient genetic material?
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
Right.
And of course, the premise is fascinating in and of itself. Everybody wants to know what happens when people interact with dinosaurs. And a third way that you can intrigue the reader is with a seductive narrative voice. Now, this mostly applies to prose, but it applies to comics too. And I think of Watchmen, and in particular, Rorschach, who's always going,
Right.
and that's the kind of little touch that sticks with you and makes him stand out. And of course, Alan Moore applied his touch to all those characters who have distinctive talking patterns. And that's what I try to do too. I try to characterize my characters with speech. So I keep my ears open, and I always carry a notebook with me at all times, so that if I hear a particularly memorable bit of speech that I've never heard before, and that's the trick, that you've never heard before or is rarely heard outside of wherever you heard it, I write it down and I will use it. But on the flip side of that coin is you got to beware of cliches. You got to avoid them like the plague. And I can't tell you how many times have we read, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. How many times have we read that in a comic?
That's terrible.
It's just lazy. And
on television and movies too.
Yeah, and so is Move It People. And my favorite, We Have to Talk. Because we have to talk means, dramatic showdown. She's pissed about something.
It's lazy.
And, and people are going to be pissed. They're going to want to talk, but find a different way to say it, or find a way to show it without words. Because the first rule of writing comics is entertain. That's the prime directive. Make every part of it entertaining.
Please.
No drab patches, no boring patches. Every part of that story has to be entertaining. No wasted panels, no vamping around. The second rule is show, don't tell, because it is a visual medium. And by that I mean that any way you can advance the story visually without a lot of chatter, you should do it. And for people who wonder what I mean, I would say tune in to Better Call Saul. It's one of my favorite programs, because it usually begins with a wordless 5-minute sequence, which is intriguing. And you're following the camera along. You say, what's going on here? And at the end of that sequence, you realize, oh, I see. And then it sets the stage for the larger story to follow. And the third directive is be unique, be original. And we're all unique human beings. And when we become skilled at writing, we're going to bring our own worldview to whatever it is and hopefully make it fresh and interesting. I always think of John D. MacDonald, who is probably the writer most responsible for me writing fiction today. And many people have not heard of him, but they've certainly seen the movie Cape Fear.
Oh, yes.
Which he wrote, and it's been made twice. And he was a great writer that lived in Florida, and he created a memorable character in Travis McGee, who was a beach bum and a kind of court of last resort for people who'd been wronged and couldn't get satisfaction anywhere else. And that's the inspiration for my biker novels, featuring Josh Pratt, a reformed motorcycle hoodlum. But I remember reading John D. MacDonald 40 years ago. And 40 years ago, he was bitching about the airlines, saying how they would try to infantilize all their passengers with the constant hectoring of sit in your
True.
seat, don't get out unless you have to go to the restroom. And today it's a
It's worse
thousand
now.
times worse. It's a thousand times worse. You go to the
Certainly.
airport and the constant lecturing. If you see any suspicious packages, if you leave your package, it will be destroyed. Wear a mask. Stay 6 feet apart. Uh, and I can't imagine anyone who doesn't know about these rules and restrictions at this stage, and yet they blast them out every 5 minutes. And of course, flying used to be a pleasure, at least compared to today.
Certainly. I totally agree with you on that. I think it's very interesting that you talk about writing, doing like sketches for your pages because, and you mentioned Alan Moore because Alan Moore does the same thing.
I
He
didn't know
is
that.
he had an art background and he's very meticulous on the way that he presents stuff to his artists. Now, obviously, he's worked with some of the best artists in the business. He's not being disrespectful, but he wants things done a certain way. How important do you think it is to present like a visual guide to your artist
No, I think
as
it's
a
very
writer?
important. I no longer draw each page out by hand, but I will draw if the artist asks me to, or if he wants me to show him exactly how to do it. I write full script now, but my scripts are terse too, and the directions are very specific and spare. Spare as I can make. I'll give him an angle shot, uh, uh, and I'll have an establishing shot on every page. And this is very important for anybody who wants to do comics. You have to have an establishing shot on every page. An establishing shot is a picture or a panel that involves everybody involved in the story at that moment in the same place in their physical relationship to one another. They may be riding in a tank or spread out in a ballroom or flying through space, but you got to have them all together in one panel. And then you can move to close ups to person, whoever's talking. But you got to have an establishing shot on every page.
What do you think separates a good writer from a great writer?
Oh, I don't know. Some people's good writers are other people's great writers. Uh, I do know that the ability to tell a story and the things I notice, entertainment, show don't tell, a seductive narrative voice are all very important. And I think also a good writer or a great writer makes every part of the story entertaining, no dull parts. And I'm thinking like Leon Uris, one of my favorite novelists. He wrote Exodus and Battle Cry, both of
Oh,
which were made into movies. And he just was a master of the big literary novel, but it was all fun, especially a book like Battle Cry, which was his first novel and reflected his experience as a GI in the Pacific during World War II, when he would write about soldiers and he'd get their patois down cold. And of
mhm.
course, that involved a lot of vulgarity and fuck you and shit this and shit on a shingle. But that's part of what makes it real. Uh,
Sure.
so, an ear for dialogue is important. You've got to have your characters speak. Because I say a character reveals himself through his speech. And you use that to characterize people. This just popped into my head, but I had a friend where I was growing up in Mitchell, South Dakota. His mother always answered the phone like this, hello. And I'm remembering this now for the first time in 50 years, and I think I'm going to use it. Hello.
It's great. Yeah. That's the sort of thing that definitely distinguishes characters. And something that you mentioned earlier, which is people making, like speaking directly to the viewer or,
Breaking
something in
breaking
comics
the
that
fourth wall.
that drives me nuts too. I don't. It's not necessarily what they're saying. It's just how they're saying it. I mean, you can tell that whatever it is that they need to say, you can tell that in the story instead of just handing it to people. That's not good storytelling. That's terrible.
Sometimes. Have you seen the Ballad of Buster Scruggs?
I have not, and I should
Okay.
because I'm a
You,
big Coen Brothers fan.
you got to watch the first episode, which is brilliant. It's about this singing cowboy. And the guy who plays, he's always been a bit actor. Let me see. I want to get his name here.
Okay.
Because he just romped it in this one. He just burst himself into the front rank of actors that I love. Where is he? All right, here we go.
I'll put some of your links up for people to go
I
check
can't
out.
believe this. They have everybody here but this guy, and he's the whole thing. He's the whole show.
You're kidding.
No. Oh,
That doesn't make a lot of sense.
I can't believe this. All right, you know what? We're going to write, who played Buster Scruggs?
Yeah, if anyone's watching out there, help us out by giving us
we got this
the
right
comments.
now. Who played Buster Scruggs?
Oh, it's the actual character that played them.
Tim Blake Nelson.
Oh,
Tim Blake Nelson.
that
Hey,
guy has a new movie out.
I'll see it. But the thing about Buster Scruggs is he's riding his horse through a canyon singing, playing a guitar, because he's a singing cowboy. And then he starts talking directly to the audience. And his speech is so unique. His patterns of speech, they're both a mix of homely and erudite. And it just rings true. It's just like a prairie philosopher would speak. And it's just fabulous. And that, I like the whole thing, although they're very downbeat, these stories, very downbeat. But the first episode is fantastic, and it just blew me away. And that's why I recommend it. And he breaks that fourth wall, and he gets away with it. But that's the exception, not the rule.
Of course. The actor that you just mentioned just has a new Western out that looks fantastic. I don't remember the name of it. I wish I did. It looks awesome. It's gone to the theaters, and I think that you can probably rent it now. Anyway, look up Tim Blake Nelson. That new Western looks awesome. What's your advice for writers who want to find an artist to work with?
Well, they do what I did, which is go down on campus and either look for art that have been pinned to telephone poles. That's how I found Jeff Butler.
Really?
Or else make a bunch of flyers that say comic book writer looking for artists to collaborate on, and be specific here, because your artist may not want to draw funny animals or furries. They may want to do superheroes. So to collaborate on a superhero comic or supernatural or a horror comic or a war story, contact me at blah, blah, blah. That's one way to do it. Another way is to go to DeviantArt.
Mm-hmm.
And just scroll through there, because there are so many great artists on DeviantArt. And there was another one that Ron Fourier mentioned at this con we were at last week. Unfortunately, I don't have that notebook with me, but I wrote it down, and he says he's gotten many artists out of that. But, if you go on Twitter and say, looking for comic artists, you're going to be deluged.
Possibly,
remember,
yes.
Sturgeon's Law. So, if you can find an artist, get out of here. I'm sorry, Freddie. All right, Freddie, come on up here. Ugh.
Hey, I like dogs. You don't have to apologize for him at all.
Get the head up here. Let's get this.
Yeah, let's see him. Oh, hey, Freddie.
The dog of tomorrow.
Yes.
Here today. We'll just keep the camera on. No, the people don't. Yes, they probably do want to see you, Freddie, but nevertheless. All right. Cameo.
I can see that he's a bit of a ham.
Oh, he is, yeah. Well, what were we talking about? How to find artists? Oh, yeah. The thing is, if you get a good artist, somebody that you can trust and get the job done, and I've done this many times, and it's only blown up in my face once, is you say, you throw in with me, and I will give you co-ownership of the character in the property.
Yes,
but
for sure.
Before you begin, I urge you to get a contract specifying duties, responsibilities, and rewards. And unfortunately,
that's a good idea.
These contracts get very long and tangled. You talk about film rights, TV rights, gaming rights, merchandising rights, and chances are none of this is going to happen. But it has happened Look at
Yeah.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Great example.
Yeah.
I mean, who would have? I mean, a lot of people who know Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles didn't see the gritty, wild black and white comic that is based on, and it is nothing like the cartoon or anything that you've seen in the movies. It is radically different from that.
Right.
Who would have thought that it would have become the, the phenomenon that it became?
Yeah.
Pretty crazy. Do you think it's a better idea to do your own comics or to try to work for a big comic company?
Well, these days, if you have talent, and I have to say again, that Sturgeon's Law. I go to these local conventions, and there are all these hopefuls there, young kids, middle-aged kids who are putting out their own comics that they write and illustrate themselves. And most of them are pretty bad. And I never say this, and I would never tell anybody that their comic is bad, and I'd never tell anybody else that comic is bad. But it's just that there's something about the medium that attracts people, that stirs their creative juices. And I think that part of the problem is that comics are so transparent. You see the pictures and the words, it's a little pamphlet, that everybody thinks they can do them.
Right.
But right now, when I look at Marvel and DC, they don't seem to be interested in entertainment anymore. And that's why their sales are circling the drain. I rarely look at their books. I did pick up a couple of Marvels this past year. They were Captain America and Master of Kung Fu. And neither of them contain any entertainment value, as near as I could tell. And the Master of Kung Fu was particularly sad because there were no martial arts in it. And that's always been a thing of mine, is to show realistic martial arts in a dynamic and interesting manner. And I've been doing that for 40 years. And all you have to do is look at the Punisher or Badger or the Bruce Lee comics I've done, or the current Thin Blue Line comic. My artist, Joseph Arnold, is a full-time police officer and a jiu-jitsu master. And he drew the jiu-jitsu scenes the way they're supposed to be done. That they're both a tutorial.
We're going to show some pictures on that here in a moment.
They're both tutorial and entertaining, which is the way it should be. So if you have the talent, by all means, put out your own comic. It's cheap. And if you want to break in the majors, there's no better way than to produce a comic that has merit, go to a convention, hand it to an editor. Because if it looks halfway interesting, the editor will read it. And
that's a great calling card. I mean, a printed comic, they're going to know exactly what you're going to deliver.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be expensive. You can plan it in black and white. And you can print it at your local FedEx Kinko's and staple it together. Because that's, the binding isn't what's important. What's important is what's on the page. But before you do that, somebody's going to say, what is your story about? And when you get that question, you have to be prepared. You can't wing it and say, well, there's a dwarf and he lives in a kingdom with orcs, or maybe it's dragons. No, you got to sit down and put together a concise and entertaining description of what you're doing. And if you want to know what I mean, just go to Amazon and look up any Travis McGee novel and look at the description at the top of the page. It says Travis didn't know what he was getting into when he helped a barefoot girl out of the gutter, but he soon learned that Sue had demons on her trail in the shape of the mafia or whatever. And it lays it out like that much better than what I said here, although I prepare these come-ons for all my properties and I write them down, and sometimes I memorize them. I've lost the memories on them, but they're all written down somewhere. And I could bring one up and read it to you, what I mean. But I would say just go to Amazon, look up the type of novel you prefer or the type of story you want to do, and look at the description at the top of the page. And that's what you have to have. And you can write it out and hand it out if you like, or you can read it to them. But be prepared and get that concept down on paper. What is your story about? And it should be between 250 and 500 words, although there are exceptions. For instance, my novel Helmet Head, Nazi biker zombies. Dirk.
Oh, did I? Yes.
Did you hear me?
Yeah, Nazi biker zombies. I heard it.
That's
Yeah,
it.
that's
That's it.
that is succinct.
Now, for certain
But I'm
demographic,
interested.
that's all they have to hear. They say, Nazi
Right.
biker zombies. I'm there. But that's the
Right.
only book of mine. Well, I mean, I have short descriptions of all my novels, but I love that one the best because it's so concise and it's so focused. It's so focused.
And it tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to share the stuff, and I'm going to share your Indiegogo campaign. And while I am, please tell me about your inspiration for Thin Blue Line, please.
Well, it was watching the summer of 2020 and seeing cities in flames, looters running in and out of shops, and car wrecks, and $2 billion in damage, thousands of small businesses destroyed, people who could least afford to lose them, dozens of murders, and talking heads standing in front of these flaming cities saying, here at these mostly peaceful protests. And then the cry began to go, defund the police. And if you're a rational person, the first time you heard that, you think, what the fuck? Defund the police? Again, civilization depends on the rule of law. You're either for the rule of law or you're not. And this doesn't get into complexities of there are bad cops. We know there are bad cops, but I know
Sure.
cops, and most cops are good-hearted people who join the force because they want to serve their community. And you have to have police. Ideally, you have police that are honorable people of character and want to uphold the law, but have empathy. And I have run into several such people, and I like to think that they comprise the majority of police. Police are just a necessary evil in a civilized society. What happens when you defund the police? Well, you can see the answer in Minneapolis, Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco. San Francisco decriminalized theft of anything up to $900. That means if you steal $890 worth of merchandise, they're not even going to bother to contact the police because the police won't come. They're not interested. As a result of this brilliant policy, every Walgreens in San Francisco has closed its doors and moved out. Many other businesses are shuttered. People are leaving San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle in droves because those cities have become unlivable. Homicides are up 100% in every city that's talking about defunding the police. Same with rape and armed robbery. It's just insane. It's insane talk. And all these people, and we know who they are, who said, oh, defund the police. They said, oh, I never meant that. And, every one of those people that called for defunding the police, the politicians at least, they've never met a payroll in their lives. They never worry about where their next paycheck is coming from. And they all have private security details. Or if not, they can command the police because of who they are. And so that's why I wrote this book.
So that was the impetus for the Thin Blue Line. And tell us about the plot.
It was about two police officers trying to survive the night in a riot-torn city, and they're assigned to protect the mayor. And the mayor is a typical politician who bends whichever way the wind blows, which means he's a compulsive liar. And I think, we'd be hard-pressed to name a politician who doesn't lie.
It's so true.
But it's about the cops themselves. They have families. They're worried about their families. And then the mob just takes over, and their protection detail turns into a rout, and they have to flee with the mayor through cellars and get out of the city with all these mobs chasing them. And it's just about the encounters that they have with people of ill will and some people of goodwill, and how they survive the night and the effect it has on them in the end. But again, I want to stress that my main goal is to entertain. There are no speeches, there are no lectures in this. It's just drama all the way through, and it clicks and pops on every page. There's not a wasted panel or word. You're going to love it. It'll be the best comic you've read all year.
I believe you. Let's look through some of the artwork here and tell us a little bit about the artist. I think it's very interesting to hear that he's a full-time police officer.
Yeah, Joe is a full-time police officer. I've known him since long before he became a cop. He was part of a little group that would meet at my house. There's a jiu-jitsu scene that Joe drew.
That's dynamic
Yeah.
and great artwork, by the way.
Yeah. And they would come to my house once a month, and I'd cook chili, and we'd just talk comics. Gabe El-Taib was another member of that group.
Right.
So when I conceived this story, I thought, well, I'll get Joe to draw it. And even though he's a full-time police officer, he did the job in record time, faster than many professionals.
No
Now,
kidding.
The inks are the work of Jeff Slemons, who's a brilliant artist in his own right.
Very cool. I mean, I think you can see what's happening here.
Yeah.
You have a nice colorist too.
Ixan and Sori.
I mean, this is quality work here, unquestionably.
It's first-rate work. It's better than anything the big two have put out in years. I guarantee it.
So you show the Punisher here. That's pretty good bona fides. your run on Punisher, which was obviously, gave people the idea for the movies that have come out and everything else. I mean, it led to that.
Well, partially. I mean, Chuck Dixon also wrote the Punisher, and
Chuck
did an
Dixon,
excellent
great
job.
writer. Yep.
But when I wrote the Punisher, I approached it as a straight crime story, and I ripped the stories from the headlines. Anybody who's read my run knows this, and there were no aliens or superheroes or supernatural elements in the story. And then about 3 years later, my editor, Carl Potts, got kicked upstairs, and I had a new editor. And he was more of a gimmick guy. And that's when you started to see X-Men and other elements. But I'm very proud of my run on the Punisher. And I must say that when military and police use the Punisher logo, I'm honored.
That's it. Oh, that's interesting. I wish I'd even thought to ask that. Yeah, that is something that some people are very upset about it, and other people are. I mean, obviously, you're saying that you like it.
Yeah.
Clearly, I mean, people have adopted, whatever logos for all kinds of stuff. I mean, how many times have you seen Superman logos as tattoos and everything else? So
can you play the video?
I can. As long there's no music or anything in it that's
there's
gonna
music,
get me in
but
trouble
it's all
with
legal.
YouTube.
It's all
Okay, good.
legal music.
All right, yeah. As long as you agree to allow me to play it, then we're good.
See if you can blow that up in the lower right-hand corner. I'm not getting any sound here. Oh,
No
well.
sound.
No. All right, folks, just go to that address there
Sorry.
and play it for
I haven't-
yourselves.
I'm sorry, I don't have sound for you.
Don't worry about it, Dirk. I must have watched it a half dozen times in the past week. I mean, on shows.
I can hear it, and it sounds great.
All right.
Yeah, go to the link below and see the video for yourself. Your goal, you've already reached your goal on this thing. You're at 166.
Yeah, it's a very modest goal, and we need to get to 50,000 to adopt a cop, which would pay for police officers to do jujitsu training, the purpose of which is to be able to subdue people without hurting them or yourself.
Oh, I think that's brilliant.
But let me tell you about the unspoken stretch goals, and these are real.
Sure.
If we get to 20,000, I dye my hair blue. Get to 30, green.
Yes.
40, mohawk.
Oh my
50, shaved skull.
Hey, shaved skull's not such a bad deal.
I know. I always want one, but my wife won't let me.
It makes you don't have to worry about rain. Never messes up your hair. Wind, no problem. It's not a bad gig. Let's also say that it's 56 pages that you're getting here, full color, right? I think some of the stretch goals you're going to have additional pages, correct?
Yeah.
You can get the print version for $25. That's important to say. If you just want to read the story, there's a digital version for $10.
You say, well, why would you pay $25 for a graphic novel? Well, because it's the most memorable story you're going to read all year. I promise you that. You'll never forget it. You're going to treasure the book because it's just a great story. And I know how to do that.
I mean, you've proven that time and time again. There's no question about it. You got an autograph bundle here for $50. I think there's something very interesting. You got some original pages here. And you can appear in the comic.
That's right. You get put on a wanted poster on the post office wall.
Hello.
Or you can appear in a mob scene.
One out of 3 of those is claimed.
Or you can be an alleged perp. Also, at some stage, we're going to offer a ride-along coin. This is a ride-along coin.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me get you up fully on this here. Oh, wow. That is nice.
In Phoenix, Arizona. It's a big, thick thing. You could hurl this at someone and probably knock
Take them out?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I tell you what. Tell me a little bit about how the campaign's going. You got how long do you have left?
Let me see. We don't have much time left, although because we met our goal, we're going to go in demand for another month, and that means people can 11 days left. People can always buy the book. But after the campaign ends, these tiers with their special add-ons are going to end too. And we're offering a special retailer bundle for people who want to put it in their shop.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Original art.
Yeah, original art's cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, and like I said, how many working police officers do you know that draw comics? Well, it turns out that there are quite a few, because once we launched this campaign, police officers started reaching out to me on Twitter, and now we have at least 2 cops who do comics in their spare time are contributing art, and they're both very good artists. It's not amateur stuff.
I think it's pretty cool that you have actual officers that are involved in this project. I guess the last question that I have for you kind of on this subject is, how is doing a crowdfunding campaign different from doing it the traditional way of publishing a comic?
Well, when you mean the traditional way, would you mean like submitting it to a publisher?
Sure, going through a publisher, having them take care of all the back end for you.
Well, if you get a big publisher, they're going to pay you when you turn the pages in. That's the main difference.
Right.
And here we get our money on the back end. But as you know, there's a whole world of comics out there that's completely separate from corporate comics. Some people call it Comicsgate. Other people call it independent comics. And there's some outstanding work being done in that area. I've seen some of these books. They have great artists like Mike S. Miller, Graham Nolan, Art Thiebaud. And these guys have all worked for the majors. They've all done brilliant stuff, and now they're working for themselves. And so they're doing their best stuff for themselves.
Yeah. And doing it the way they want to do it, instead of kind of having an editor or someone. I mean, you talked about how changing editors changed the way that you had to present your work. If you don't have an editor, you do it your way.
That's right. We all need editors. I mean, we all need people to go over our stuff. So I don't know if I need people to go over my comic scripts, but I certainly need an editor when it comes to my novels. Because I go over my scripts over and over again until I think that they're just about where they should be before I send them out. That's one hint I give to writers is never send something out the day that you finished it. Never. You let that sit overnight and look at it again in the morning. Yeah,
no one gets away without without editing their stuff. I mean, you might say that Stephen King gets away without editing a lot of stuff, but because that guy can go on and on and on. I guess the final question I have for you is, what do you have coming up next?
Well, when Thin Blue Line is done, we're going to launch a campaign for the second Florida Man graphic novel.
Cool.
Which is even funnier than the first. I'm writing The Saints for Allegiance Arts. It's a 6-issue series about a group of archaeologists who work in secret to protect the world's most valuable undiscovered sites from saboteurs or tomb raiders, such as you remember about 20 years ago, ISIS went into Afghanistan and blew up some magnificent Hindu temples that had been carved out of rock.
That enrages me.
And that's what this,
I love that.
yeah,
Yes.
that's what the Saints are all about. I'm also writing a series for Martin Perkel, who's a visionary Austrian. It's called 2084. And it's actually about everything that's happening right now, everything that Orwell predicted, which is happening right now, with this difference that in the future there are powerful telepaths and telekinetics, most of whom work for these corporations who run the world. But there are a minority of rebels who have gone outside the system who are trying to bring them down. And I'm having a lot of fun with that. And the art is first rate. It's just...
that sounds awesome.
I'll send you some art later.
That is way up my alley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm working with Pat Broderick on a Western called Bronze Star.
Pat Broderick. I haven't
And
heard that name in a while.
It's the best work of his career. Wait till you
Wow.
see this stuff. It's going to just
Wow.
knock you out. We don't have a publisher for that. Now, of course, Bloody Red Baron is going to publish both Thin Blue Line and the next Florida Man graphic novel. But I have these things in the works, and they're well along. Pat has already penciled and inked 24 pages.
Oh,
and
wow.
they're just stunning, and I'm very excited about it.
I want to see him. Yeah, Western too. I love the sound of that. That's great.
I do have 2 books coming out in the early part of next year that I wrote, the Justin Belmont Commission. One is Smokes the Fox, about a dope smoking mutant fox. And the other is called Weaponized Werewolf, about an intelligent werewolf that escapes from a government lab and goes on a killing spree. And they're both interrelated. They're both in the same universe. And the art is superb. Lee Oakes, Drew Smokes, and Barry McLean Jr., the hardest working man in comics, drew Weaponized Werewolf. And, you know, Barry and I have a series that we've been working on for years called Cue Ball, which is a martial arts espionage thriller.
Nice.
And Barry's getting close to the end. It's like a 140-page story. It was going to be 5 issues, but then Barry got a deal with Blue Juice, and they just do graphic novels. So they will probably be publishing that next year.
So to speak.
And I'm
All
working
right.
on my 9th biker novel.
Wow. Speaking of the hardest working man in comics, I mean, and in novels, you're turning it out.
Yeah, but I can't hold a candle to friends of mine like Peter Brandvold, who writes 6 novels a year, or Kevin J. Anderson, who publishes at least 500,000 words a year.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible.
You know,
No kidding. Still very impressive. Let's go through the places where people can find you. I'll put up as much as I can. Oh, I lost him. Maybe he'll come back. If he doesn't, I'll take care of it for him. Give him a few moments here. That's what you get into with live. Here he comes.
keep doing that. I meant to go into private chat.
That's all right. I have several of your links here if you want to go through
all
them.
right. Okay, go for it.
All right. I have bloodyredbaron.com, which is
That's
your
my
your
website.
main site. I also on Twitter at Bloody Red Baron, so you've stuck with the same moniker there. Your Indiegogo campaign is right there for Thin Blue Line. That's running right now. It's running for the next 11 days. And then finally, your Facebook group, people ought to get on. It's the Comics and Novels of Mike Baron group on Facebook, and there that is. And we'll list all of this if you obviously you don't want to write down all those numbers. I'll list that every place that this is posted. Is there any place else that I didn't mention that you'd like to mention?
Well, I'm on Substack. I've been writing a column there. It's mikebaron.substack.com. The column's
Substack.
free. It's about whatever enters my head at the time. And it's mostly lighthearted, but I'm wrestling with one about the TSA. I don't know whether I should release it or not. I might pass it by you first.
You might get on a no-fly list on that. Better be careful. All right. Hey, Mike, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being on here. It's really an honor and a pleasure to have you here and to share the information and knowledge and experience that you've had is very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk.
It's, absolutely my pleasure. All right. Well, that's it, folks. Thanks to Mike for being on here. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like or share wherever you see this or subscribe. Just a little bit helps a lot. We sure do appreciate it. So until next time, this is Dirk Hooper saying dream hard.